In the spring of 1940, a lightning campaign tore through Western Europe at a speed that stunned generals and journalists alike. In just 6 weeks, German armies shattered the French field army, collapsed the British expeditionary force, and occupied Paris, while tanks and motorized infantry bypassed fortified positions and encircled entire corps. That spectacle of success, Blitzkrieg, as it was later called, was not the product of a single genius plan or a miraculous weapon. It was the result of several converging strengths: doctrinal innovation, superior operational art, disciplined and flexible forces, improved communications, effective combined arms, ruthless logistical improvisation, and opponents who were unprepared for the tempo of modern maneuver. The question historians still ask is not whether Germany could win battlefield victories early in the war. The question is how those battlefield advantages came together and why they eventually failed. The roots of German effectiveness stretch back to the constraints and experiments of the 1920s and 1930s, forbidden by treaty and then forced to rearm quickly. Germany developed doctrines that prized speed, initiative, and decentralized command. The German concept of off-track tactic placed responsibility in the hands of lower-level commanders to achieve objectives through judgment rather than waiting for rigid orders from above. That cultural preference for initiative produced officers comfortable with risk and swift decision-making. The general staff tradition retained a high professional standard of planning and staff work, translating grand intentions into operational art that concentrated movement and fire at decisive points. Technology and organization amplified those cultural and doctrinal choices. German tanks were not always individually superior in armor or gun power during the early campaigns, but they were connected. Radios in most command tanks enabled commanders to coordinate movements, exploit weaknesses, and keep pace with shifting situations. British and French formations often lacked such pervasive communications, which slowed their reactions and allowed German formations to punch through seams. The Luftwaffe provided crucial air-ground coordination, disrupting enemy communications, suppressing rear areas, and supporting spearheads with dive bombers and close air support. The result was a feedback loop. Doctrine required speed. Speed demanded communications and air control, and those tools in turn magnified doctrinal advantages. Combined arms mattered. The German panzer divisions, supported by motorized infantry and engineers, conducted deep penetrations, while ordered infantry and anti-tank units handled mopping up and securing supply lines. Artillery was used with timing and concentration to break points of resistance, not simply to pound fixed positions indefinitely. Reconnaissance units probed and reported, creating situational awareness that allowed commanders to shift forces and envelop. Staff officers rehearsed battle plans, prepared for contingencies, and adapted on the fly. The German army's operational tempo was not merely about fast-moving tanks, but about nested supporting elements, operating in synchronization, a mechanical symphony of movement, fire, and logistics. Logistics itself was not seamless, but German armies excelled at improvisation and ruthless use of captured resources in the short term. During the Blitzkrieg campaigns, supply often followed success because roads and railways fell into German hands alive and functioning. Armies living off the land and requisitioning transport could maintain tempo for weeks. The Wehrmacht also prioritized fuel and ammunition allocation for armored thrusts, even as other branches suffered. For the early phase of the war, this trade-off produced spectacular results. Against the Soviets in 1941, German formations again used speed and surprise to destroy. Soviet formations reeling from purges, poor command cohesion, and catastrophic initial losses in training and morale. Political context strengthened military effectiveness in practical ways. The Nazi regime centralized decision-making and demanded results, which concentrated resources on rearmament and the expansion of particular military capabilities. Massive investment in infrastructure such as roads and autobahns aided movement. Economic mobilization in the 1930s transformed German industry, accelerating production of tanks, artillery, and aircraft. This was not infinite. Advantaged Germany remained resource-poor compared to the Allies. But in the short term, it delivered more modern equipment, where commanders expected to use it in a higher tempo of deployment than opponents anticipated. Human factors matter too. Many German units retained experienced leaders who had served in the First World War and underwent rigorous peacetime training within the Reichswehr and later the Wehrmacht. NCOs and company commanders were drilled in initiative and small unit tactics, creating a resilient backbone of tactical competence. Early combat promotions and awards produced leaders willing to lead from the front. Morale in 1939 and 1940 was high, fueled by nationalistic zeal and a string of successes that reinforced confidence. Conversely, opponents such as France suffered from political divisions, outdated doctrines and command structures that emphasized caution and secrecy over initiative. Intelligence, deception, and operational cunning further tilted the battlefield. The German use of feints, false concentrations, and unexpected axes of advance, most famously the Ardennes maneuver in 1940, allowed operational surprises that bypassed the expected front lines. German planners exploited the Allies' assumptions about where the main effort would come and redirected their strength to weaker points. Signals intelligence and efficient radio communications gave Germans an edge in understanding local conditions and coordinating attacks in real time. Yet none of these elements alone explains the phenomenon. Effectiveness was cumulative. Doctrine demanded certain tools. The organization provided them. Technology enabled them. Political will funded them. Human leadership executed them. And enemy weaknesses magnified results. Early German victories therefore reflected a well-aligned, if imperfect, military-industrial ecosystem geared toward fast, decisive operations. This is also where the contrast emerges and why analysis must be careful. What made Germany so effective in 1939 and 1940 concentration of force? Daring operational art and exploitation of surprise was not sustainable indefinitely without enormous resources, strategic depth, and diplomatic isolation of potential enemies. The very strengths that created early victories would collide with structural weaknesses, limited raw materials, a smaller population than the Allies, ideological interference that corrupted decision-making, and a strategic overreach that invited slow attritional warfare. That contrast between early tactical brilliance and later strategic exhaustion is at the heart of the story. Next, we analyze industry mobilization, political decisions, and the strategic limits exposed later globally. To understand Germany's early dominance, you must see how doctrine and industry were braided together. The Wehrmacht did not rely on magic weapons or inevitable genius. It exploited a pragmatic marriage of organizational culture, focused production, and operational art. The state concentrated on specific capabilities that amplified one another, fast, well-coordinated formations. A cadre of experienced leaders. Radios that connected tanks into coherent maneuver systems, and an air force that could shape the battlefield. Each element was optimized, not as an isolated advantage, but as part of a system designed to shatter cohesion and exploit gaps. Consider logistics, often treated as dull until it is absent. Germany invested in mobility where it mattered. Roads and rail corridors were prioritized to support rapid advances. More important was the ability to improvise. Captured supply depots, requisitioned fuel, and on-the-move maintenance allowed frontline units to sustain tempo longer than expected. The Army accepted calculated risk in leaving organic rear area, security thin in exchange for greater operational reach. That gamble paid off repeatedly in 1939 and 1940 because opponents failed to react quickly enough to seal breaches or disrupt lines of communication. Industrial policy was focused and efficient. Rather than attempting to build everything at once, German planners concentrated on producing weapons that fit their doctrine. Tanks like the Panzer III and Panzer IV were developed with modularity and ease of repair in mind. The Luftwaffe emphasized aircraft that could support ground operations and munitions. Factories were pushed to meet those specific needs. This focus allowed for quicker turnarounds and higher sortie rates than critics often assume. Centralized control over procurement, combined with powerful private firms willing to work with the regime, produced equipment that was good enough and delivered in time to be decisive. Training amplified technical and organizational advantages. The Reichswehr's small professional corps became the seedbed for a larger force. NCOs and junior officers were steeped in mission command and small unit initiative. In peacetime maneuvers, commanders learned to synchronize artillery, armor, and infantry. There was emphasis on combined arms, drills, radio discipline, and reconnaissance. That meant that when the army expanded in the late 1930s, the new formations inherited a culture and a baseline competence that was disproportionately effective compared to their size. Intelligence and deception complemented these strengths. German planners excelled at hiding their true intentions, as in the 1940 Ardennes maneuver, and at exploiting gaps in enemy reconnaissance. Signals intelligence and efficient use of air reconnaissance allowed planners to identify weak points and mass forces precisely. Operational security often created the psychological effect of inevitability. When defenders could not predict where the next blow would fall, cohesion cracked more rapidly. Technology was not always world-beating, but it was appropriate. Instead of chasing exotic, narrowly specialized platforms, German engineers emphasized reliability, maintainability, and performance where it would matter most. Field modifications were common, and rapid units adapted. Captured equipment and spare parts were scrounged when necessary. This improvisational skill turned scarcity into a temporary operational resource rather than an immediate strategic deficiency. An important advantage was the relative freshness of the German officer corps' combat experience. Many senior leaders had fought in the First World War and retained institutional memory of operational art. Those lessons, combined with years of focused professional education and large-scale maneuvers, produced a cadre able to conduct complex operations. Contrast this with some opponents whose peacetime doctrines grew ossified. With staff practices that could not match German flexibility at the decisive moment, political structures accelerated military readiness. The Nazi regime centralized decision-making and marshaled resources for rearmament with extraordinary speed. Industrialists responded to orders and incentives. Labor was directed towards war production. Infrastructure projects such as autobahns had dual civilian and military utility. The result was not perfect production, but a tempo of rearmament that outpaced many of Germany's neighbors in critical early years. Psychological factors deserve attention. Early victories created a feedback loop of confidence that helped sustain momentum. Fear and confusion among opponents, whether in Poland, France, or the first weeks of Barbarossa, eroded resistance far more quickly than material deficits alone might predict. The shock of rapid encirclement undermined morale and produced disproportionately large surrenders, which in turn freed German units to exploit further. Yet none of these factors was unbounded. German success was scalable only to the extent that resources and strategic circumstances allowed. The system excelled at short, violent operational cycles aimed at decisive blows. It was less well-suited to prolonged multi-front attrition against adversaries with superior industrial bases. When the war stretched across vast distances and resources became scarce, the same qualities that produced success, rigid prioritization, centralized political control, and brutal operational tempo, could not compensate for shortages of oil, steel, and manpower. In sum, Germany's effectiveness sprang from a coherent combination of doctrine, organization, and opportunistic logistics, supported by a political will that prioritized rapid rearmament. Its commanders were trained to think in terms of operational art. Its industry supplied tools aligned with those concepts. Its communications and reconnaissance knit the battlefield into a picture that could be exploited. The result was an engine of striking power that dominated early battlefields. But the system's underlying trade-offs also foreshadowed the limits that would later become catastrophic. When strategy required more than speed and surprise, that tension between operational brilliance and structural fragility would determine the long-term outcome. When the strategic axis shifted to sustain production, logistics, and resource depth, the initial advantages withered, and the Allies' numerical redundancy proved decisive. That shift turned German strengths into vulnerabilities the Allies could exploit through attrition. Industrial scaling and coordinated strategic warfare. That reality proved decisive. To fully grasp why Germany was so effective in the early stages of World War II, it's crucial to delve into the specific battles and campaigns that showcased their tactical and strategic prowess. The Blitzkrieg strategy, characterized by rapid, coordinated attacks using combined arms, is not just a theoretical concept, but a proven method that yielded stunning victories. Let's examine some of the key campaigns that highlighted Germany's military effectiveness. The invasion of Poland in September 1939 marked the first major test of Germany's new military doctrines and tactics. The campaign was a resounding success, lasting just over a month and resulting in the complete defeat of the Polish military. The German forces employed a combination of air power, armored divisions, and infantry to achieve a swift and decisive victory. The Luftwaffe provided crucial air support, bombing Polish airfields and disrupting communications, while the panzer divisions conducted deep penetrations, encircling and destroying Polish units. The Polish army, despite its bravery, was no match for the speed and coordination of the German forces. The campaign demonstrated the effectiveness of the Blitzkrieg strategy and set the stage for future German victories. The Battle of France in 1940 is often cited as the quintessential example of German military effectiveness. The German forces, under the command of General Erich von Manstein, executed a daring plan that involved a rapid advance through the Ardennes forest, a region considered impassable by the Allies. The German panzer divisions, supported by the Luftwaffe, quickly broke through the French lines, encircling and destroying large numbers of Allied troops. The French army, despite its numerical superiority, was caught off guard by the speed and audacity of the German attack. The campaign lasted just 6 weeks, resulting in the fall of France and the occupation of Paris. The Battle of France showcased the German ability to execute complex, coordinated operations with precision and speed. The Battle of Britain, which followed the fall of France, was a different kind of challenge for the German military. The Luftwaffe, under the command of Hermann Göring, attempted to gain air superiority over the Royal Air Force RAF in preparation for a planned invasion of Britain. The battle was a turning point in the war, as the RAF successfully defended British airspace, inflicting heavy losses on the Luftwaffe. Despite this setback, the Battle of Britain highlighted the German ability to conduct large-scale air operations and the importance of air power in modern warfare. The battle also demonstrated the resilience and adaptability of the German military, as they quickly shifted their focus from ground operations to air warfare. The invasion of the Soviet Union, codenamed Operation Barbarossa, was the largest military operation in history at the time. The German forces, comprising over 3 million troops, launched a massive offensive against the Soviet Union in June 1941. The initial stages of the campaign were highly successful, with German forces achieving deep penetrations into Soviet territory and inflicting heavy losses on the Red Army. The German Blitzkrieg strategy, combined with the element of surprise, allowed them to exploit weaknesses in the Soviet defenses and achieve rapid gains. However, the vastness of the Soviet Union and the resilience of the Red Army eventually proved to be insurmountable challenges for the German forces. The campaign highlighted the limitations of the Blitzkrieg strategy when faced with a vast and determined enemy. The North African Campaign, which took place between 1940 and 1943, was another theater where German military effectiveness was on full display. The Afrika Korps, under the command of General Erwin Rommel, achieved a series of stunning victories against British and Commonwealth forces. Rommel's tactical brilliance, combined with the mobility and firepower of the German forces, allowed him to outmaneuver and defeat larger Allied armies. The campaign showcased the German ability to conduct desert warfare and the importance of leadership and initiative in military operations. However, the campaign also highlighted the limitations of the German military when faced with superior Allied resources and logistics. The Battle of Stalingrad, which took place between 1942 and 1943, was a pivotal moment in the war and a stark contrast to Germany's earlier successes. The German Sixth Army, under the command of General Friedrich Paulus, launched a massive offensive to capture the city of Stalingrad. The battle was one of the bloodiest in history, with both sides suffering heavy losses. Despite initial gains, the German forces were eventually encircled and defeated by the Red Army. The battle highlighted the limitations of the German military. When faced with a determined and well-supplied enemy, it also demonstrated the importance of logistics and supply in modern warfare. The Battle of Kursk, which took place in July 1943, was another major engagement between German and Soviet forces. The battle was the largest tank battle in history, with thousands of tanks and armored vehicles involved. The German forces, despite their initial successes, were ultimately repulsed by the Soviet defenses. The battle highlighted the limitations of the German military when faced with a numerically superior enemy. and the importance of defensive tactics in modern warfare. The Battle of the Bulge, which took place in December 1944, was the last major German offensive on the Western Front. The German forces, under the command of Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, launched a surprise attack against Allied positions in the Ardennes Forest. The battle was a desperate gamble by the German military as they sought to split the Allied forces and force a negotiated peace. Despite initial successes, the German forces were eventually repulsed by the Allied counterattack. The battle highlighted the limitations of the German military when faced with superior Allied resources and the importance of defensive tactics in modern warfare. Throughout these campaigns, several key factors contributed to Germany's military effectiveness. The Blitzkrieg strategy, characterized by rapid, coordinated attacks using combined arms, was a proven method that yielded stunning victories. The German ability to execute complex, coordinated operations with precision and speed was a significant advantage. The importance of air power in modern warfare was also highlighted, as the Luftwaffe provided crucial support to ground operations. Leadership and initiative were crucial, as German commanders demonstrated a willingness to take risks and exploit opportunities. The German military's adaptability and resilience were also important factors, as they quickly shifted their focus from ground operations to air warfare and desert warfare. However, these successes also highlighted the limitations of the German military, the vastness of the Soviet Union, and the resilience of the Red Army eventually proved to be insurmountable challenges for the German forces. The importance of logistics and supply in modern warfare was also demonstrated, as the German military struggled to maintain their momentum in the face of superior Allied resources. The limitations of the Blitzkrieg strategy when faced with a numerically superior enemy were also highlighted, as the German military was eventually repulsed by the Soviet defenses. In conclusion, Germany's military effectiveness in the early stages of World War II was the result of a combination of factors, including the Blitzkrieg strategy, the importance of air power, leadership and initiative, adaptability and resilience, and the ability to execute complex, coordinated operations. However, these successes also highlighted the limitations of the German military, including the challenges of logistics and supply, the limitations of the Blitzkrieg strategy, and the importance of defensive tactics in modern warfare. The campaigns and battles discussed in this section provide a comprehensive overview of Germany's military effectiveness and the factors that contributed to their successes and limitations. We've traced how doctrine, leadership, communications, and technology aligned to deliver fast victories. But that alignment had a hidden expiration date. Raw materials, fuel, and production capacity were the constraints that could not be wished away by tactical brilliance. Germany began the war with modern doctrine and a talented officer corps. But without the demographic base and colonial resources required for a long, industrialized war of attrition, key strategic decisions accelerated this mismatch. Hitler's refusal to delegate grand strategy, insistence on simultaneous offensives in Russia and the Mediterranean, and prioritization of politically favored projects created a command climate where good operational ideas were undermined by strategic overreach. Operational success demanded fuel, rubber, and steel. By 1942, supply lines were stretched, the Ploesti oil fields vulnerable, and German synthetic fuel plants increasingly targeted by Allied bombing. Material shortages forced compromises. Advanced tanks like Panthers and Tigers consumed disproportionate resources. Production bottlenecks limited numbers, and field units often lacked spare parts and fuel. Allied industrial mobilization, in contrast, converted national economies into sustained engines of war, where American shipyards, factories, and mines produced material at a scale Germany could not match. That industrial inequality translated into numbers: more planes, more tanks, more ships, in an endless stream of replacements that steadily eroded German advantages. On the operational level, Allied learning mattered too. The RAF and USAAF improved air interdiction, convoy tactics frustrated U-boats, and Soviet industry adapted to relocate east while mastering mass production. Intelligence was decisive, code-breaking, improved reconnaissance, and better command and control let the Allies anticipate moves, protect convoys, and direct bombing where it hurt most. German training and experience, once force multipliers, depleted under attrition. Replacement crews arrived with far fewer hours, degrading combat effectiveness in air and on land. Political brutality and ideological priorities redirected resources to genocidal projects and prestige programs, further draining manpower and material that could have shored up the war economy. Strategic hubris mattered, underestimating Soviet resilience, splitting forces across multiple theaters, and failing to prioritize oil security were errors that transformed operational daring into strategic vulnerability. In short, German warfare excelled at short, decisive bursts but lacked the strategic depth for a grinding global conflict that rewarded production, logistics and manpower reserves over tactical virtuosity. Yet the story is not only one of failure. German innovation pushed militaries worldwide to rethink tactics. Armored design and combined arms doctrine and many lessons persisted into the Cold War. What remains instructive today is the moral, tactical brilliance is transient without sustainable economics, resilient supply chains, and political systems that prioritize competence over whim. Military planners who study 1940 must therefore ask not how to copy a single campaign, but how to align doctrine, industry, and strategy, so victory is durable, not momentary. The German case warns against mistaking shock for sustainability. A fighting force must be backed by a nation willing and able to sustain the grind. That is the decisive lesson that turns early brilliance into long-term victory or into costly extinction. Remember history.